Today I have the pleasure of speaking to Professor Elad Lapidot and Professor Gabriel Levy on the topic of anti-Semitism. And Elad is a professor of philosophy at the University of Lille in France. And among his many publications, his latest book is called The State of Others, Levinas and Decolonial Israel. And Gabe Levy is a professor of religious studies at the NTNU in Norway, and his latest book is called Beyond Heaven and Earth, A Cognitive Science of Religion. And I'm Halvor Kvandal at the University of Southeastern Norway, and I'm a philosopher of religion. And like Gabe, I am very interested in the cognitive science of religion. And today, the topic is anti-Semitism. And I am very interested in the conversations around this topic. How do we talk about it? So the discourse surrounding this topic and the issue of how can we speak reasonably? How can we have a conversation about anti-Semitism? So that's the topic that we're going to explore today. So welcome to you both.
Thanks. Thanks for having us.
And I was thinking that a good place to start this conversation is by mentioning that we talked, Gabe and I, in our previous episode together, we talked about the power of narratives to shape people's reality, to shape people's perception of reality. And we briefly touched on this at the end of the episode, whether anti-Semitism is a narrative. It's a sort of story. Does it have a narrative structure? So I was thinking let's start by, I guess I ask you both whether you think that's a good approach to understand this phenomenon, that it's a sort of story that shape people's reality.
Okay.
So just feel free to jump in if you have any thoughts on that.
As a start.
I guess since we kind of brought it up in the last podcast, that I tend to agree with that it's there's a kind of persistent narrative structure behind anti-Semitism. It changes through time, but that there's kind of a Jewish people are kind of imagined as this central character in the story, basically that explains why bad things happen around them. So it's like it's a way of, in psychology, maybe it's called like protecting your ego, like that when good things happen, it's because you did something. When bad things happen, it's because some outside force has done it to you. And a lot of times the figure of the Jewish person comes in to fill that side of the story. I do see elements of that in the discourse still today, but it's obviously much more complicated than that. So yeah, that would be my answer.
And Elad, what do you think of this idea that it's a story or narrative?
Well, I think the question is interesting, to treat things as stories, anti-Semitism as a narrative, because it brings out already the double meaning of anti-Semitism as a story, in the sense of anti-Semitism is something that is a story, in the sense of we're talking about people telling stories that we call then anti-Semitic, or around which we say this is anti-Semitism. And anti-Semitism is a story in the sense of there is a story about anti-Semitism, that anti-Semitism itself is a story.
Yeah.
Just bringing into the question of the narrative that both the phenomena could be identified as, phenomenal existence as a narrative, but also what we are doing in a sense is a narrative. The phenomena itself is a part of a narrative.
In the sense that I just told a story about anti-Semitism.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so it's like a meta story or
exactly,
two layers
exactly.
of stories.
Yeah. And so it's interesting because it kind of makes the whole conversation more open to the more multi-perspective on it, and just like to be, provocative. Who is telling the story, who is the part of the story, and so forth. The story that Gabe just told, about anti-Semitism in the sense of, a narrative that puts very centrally the Jew as a person, as a collective, the Jewish as a central element of, world events that, takes responsibility and also guilt on it, as central for the entire happening. This is basically, a way of describing what is the Bible, right? A whole narrative around this group of people that somehow is becoming, due to its ways of behaving, the cause for what happens to the entire world through, of course, the world God. So in a sense, putting Jews in the center of world, it's of world events or existence and so forth, is in many ways what Judaism is about. So just saying, there is a narrative, about the Jews, that the Jews tell, that others can tell, that we can tell about the others that tell it. And there is like a series of narratives and meta-narratives that are interesting. It's an interesting thing to think about as philosophers when we're talking about what we call
the world, we could say, has bought into a Jewish narrative about Jews
and at the same time, you do have, Jews that perform as if, the state of Israel in many ways. Of course, it's a Jewish narrative that has taken the political shape and tells a story about the importance of Jews to the world. A story that is bought by, the biggest empire today in the world. It moved a lot by, Judeo-Christian narratives where the Jews in Israel has not only a geopolitical, but, we are again in philosophy of religion, has a theological, apocalyptic meaning, right? So it's a part of actual politics today that, of course, doesn't consider itself anti-Semitic.
No.
Yeah. So now and Elad, you use this concept of anti-antisemitism, and I think can you explain to us what you mean by anti-Semitism, which you have written about and discussed in many places?
Yes, so I think something nice sometimes about philosophy is that you coin concepts, and when you coin them, you don't always know exactly what they mean. Although you coin them, and you discover them, discover what. So the anti-Semitism, which I didn't coin really, there were others who used it, but it was not kind of in circulation. I think my book did contribute to it, and also I looked at it more centrally. So the idea was, I tried to understand what we were just talking about. The complexities of the discourse about, and the participating of the person who tells about the narrative in the narrative and so forth, with regard to anti-Semitism. And I was therefore looking at ways in which people, mostly philosophers and people writing theory, were talking about anti-Semitism, writing about thinking about anti-Semitism in the post-45, post-Holocaust era, an era that is, in its core, an era that is kind of structured both politically and culturally against anti-Semitism. So it's a kind of an anti-Semitic era. And I found that there was a certain way that was interesting to think about what happened in the formation of this discourse, and so I kind of, the best way that I could think about it for myself, I says, oh, this is kind of an anti-Semitic climate that speaks about anti-Semitism from a place that is not neutral, in the sense of, sometimes we say, the study of anti-Semitism, it's not like the study of the sun or the study of, Brazilian culture. I'm interested in it. Let's talk more about it. Let's discover, maybe we even discover our passion for it. That's not about it, right? It's about, from the very beginning, it's clear that we are against it. So I found interesting the whole idea of developing an entire discourse, and even a science. There is the science studies, anti-Semitism studies, that is from the very beginning, normatively very clearly positioned as being against the object on which one thinks. Which maybe it's not, there are other cases of that, but I found it very, very interestingly from the very beginning, So what does it mean to how you develop your basic knowledge of the object? How are you allowed to know an object that you have to be against? And it kind of, from there, kind of took, and I found interesting, things that I think make it both epistemically, questionable or interesting in a good sense of, there is something to find there, but politically, I think open to a lot of political problems.
Yeah, because I think in philosophy, well, when I see the term, I see a double negation, like as you mentioned. But you are also you are criticizing some forms of anti-Semitism, which are harmful. So it's there are three layers here, or you have Semitism, anti-Semitism, anti-antisemitism, and then you have criticism of anti-antisemitism. So that, well, actually there are four layers here, so it's quite complicated. But I was thinking that as an example of harmful anti-antisemitism, I was imagining something like when there have been a lot of discussions of Jewish students on US campuses being harassed when they are going to class, and by pro-Palestinian activists. And then the sort of authoritarian response by the Trump administration has been to say, okay, we're going to deport or remove, we're going to defend Jews by sort of deporting people who say things we don't like to hear. Or I'm just trying to, is that an example? Would that be an example of harmful, or what you mean by bad anti-Semitism? Something like that?
Yeah, it's an interesting example. I didn't think about it when I wrote the book, but the way you tell it, it actually makes it interesting, because the book is, the basic issue of the book is what I call the reproduction of anti-Semitism and anti-antisemitism. And if you wish, the reproduction of Semitism in anti-Semitism, and of that in anti-antisemitism. So you're right, there were many layers, the basis of which, for me, was the negation of Judaism. Semitism is to understand Jews in a way that negates Judaism. This is why they're no longer called Jews, they're called Semites. And the hostility against them is not anti-Jewish, it's anti-Semitic. So it's negating the Jews. This is what the Jews as Jews, negating Judaism, the idea that there is, some kind of a formation of culture and thought and episteme and morals that is not just biological, families, but there is some kind of what I call epistemic value to it, Judaism. So the problem that I kind of thematized was the negation of Judaism in not only Semitism and not only in anti-Semitism, but in anti-antisemitism. And in this sense, I say there is something that is kind of a reproducing a certain erasure of Jews. Now, in this sense, I was talking about the anti-Jewish problem of anti-antisemitism. What you're describing is interesting. You're showing in what way we could translate the problematic to concrete politics today. And I think it's a very good constellation that brought, because you have an anti-Semite, so to speak, Trump, acting, through whatever measures, repressive measures against what is perceived to be anti-Semites, which are the Palestinians, demonstrating. Apropos other Semites, Palestinians are Arabs and are understood also as Semites. So there is, of course, this interesting figure, but okay, bracket. And all this in the name of Jews. In the name of Jews that are supposed to be protected in the Middle East, but also in the campuses of universities. And so you have this idea of a state that represses, demonstrations in the name of Jews, which puts Jews, of course, as the symbol of state repression, which to my eyes is very damaging to Jews. Trump politics take Jews as its symbol. I think it is indeed politically harmful.
Yeah. Gabe, what do you think about this example or this idea?
I think it points to a real problem. So I think there are examples where people are basically using anti-Semitism to do something that they want, done politically, like using it as a kind of weapon or a tool, right? So they don't really seem to, actually care that much about Jews in that process. And I think Trump is probably a great example of that. Like his anti-Semitism is just peppered, or his anti-Semitism is peppered with like classic anti-Semitic like tropes.
So it
weird
reproduces
paradox in it. And so that I think that makes a lot of sense. We do seem to get, I think because we have these words like Semitism, anti-Semitism, it makes it seem like these are all kind of related phenomena that like you just flip things around. But I think they're not. Maybe just this is coming to me just now, that each of these things are actually very distinct, and we kind of get fooled because they're the words are the same in them, but these are actually maybe very distinct phenomena happening.
Yeah. And I was thinking that Holocaust denial is in the right-wing, in right-wing circles, or at least in extreme right-wing circles, it's a lot of Holocaust denial. And I'm not sure there are surveys. I'm sure there are surveys about this, about how many of those who support Trump or MAGA who in fact denied the Holocaust, or I'm not sure the numbers in this moment, but I have seen something about that which sounded worrying. So those, as you said, those who purport to defend Jews are perhaps reproducing or spreading anti-Semitic ideas or harmful, or doing things that are harmful. But on the other hand, I also have been worried. I read all these stories about anti-Semitism, about Jews in Europe also, and including in Norway, who no longer feel safe being visibly Jewish in the streets, and who feel threatened by both right-wing extremists and by left-wing extremist pro-Palestinian activists who are very loud in their in what they do. So it's a huge mess, isn't it?
Huge mess.
And so how can we? So I'm thinking there is a definition of anti-Semitism that was published by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, I was interested in your thoughts on that definition. It says that anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred toward Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed toward Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, toward Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. Is that helpful to capture the phenomenon and help us understand it?
Should I start?
Yeah, Elad, yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's very helpful for understanding the phenomena, this IHRA definition, because I think it brings out central elements of the discourse about anti-Semitism that I think is mostly an anti-anti-Semitic discourse. And I just want to say something quickly about that. Historically, there were people who called themselves anti-Semites and published anti-Semitic texts, had anti-Semitic organizations, different parties, and we have texts that are anti-Semitic texts that call themselves anti-Semitic texts. Today, we don't have these kind of things. We don't have parties that call themselves anti-Semitic. We don't have people who, publicly or as an organization, institutions are leading anti-Semitic politics. Basically, everyone is always suspect of being anti-Semitic. We don't have, in this sense, it's not the same phenomena. So we don't have today texts that, are called anti-Semitic texts. We do have texts that call anti-anti-Semitic texts, texts that declare that they are fighting against anti-antisemitism. So in a sense, what we have today is mostly anti-antisemitic discourse that points out something that we don't really know what we're talking about, because it's something that everybody basically denies, rejects. But okay, that's just to say that this document is very central to understand both anti-Semitism and anti-antisemitism today, because it's one of the central documents that are debated, a text. Now, it is connected to the former question that you asked about the Holocaust, because it comes from an organization that call itself the Alliance of the Remembrance of the Holocaust. So it is, also around the understanding of what is the memory of the Holocaust. What was the Holocaust? What is this Holocaust that we need to remember? What was it about? What was it's a lot of things. And for a lot of time, did not even have a name. It was just called, the destruction of the Jews during the war. So what do we exactly mean by that? The night of the Holocaust that we need to remember. I think it's a big question. And in many aspects, yes, it's about those who were repressing and killing and those who were killed. And there are two different memories. Now, this specific document gives a certain answer of what it is to remember the Holocaust, and it focuses very clearly about those who, were persecuted, the Jews, with almost nothing about what is the thing that made this persecution, what happened in Europe, what happened in Germany, what kind of politics was generating this persecution. It doesn't say anything. This is something that is not memorable according to this document. It's mostly about the Jews. The Jews as Jews, the definition, I think, is very, very problematic. As maybe the whole document was called a working definition. It was just to create discussions. It was not about to create policies, and even less so laws. And the person who were directing it actually said it quite recently, that actually they find very problematic what is being done with this document. And the problem is, you see first in the definition that is very, very vague, a certain perception of Jews, very understanding to understand what it even means. Then these Jews as Jews, which I think is a problematic idea to reject from the very beginning. And then this may lead to hate or hostility or something like that. It's all very, very vague. But the main issue in this document is, of course, one thing that has become the issue around which everybody talks about, and this is the state of Israel. What this document does most and for all is, first of all, to say anti-Semitism, the target of anti-Semitism does not have to be a synagogue in Oslo, does not have to be, a group of minority Jews within a majority society and state. It can also be not only a majority community of Jews, it can be the Jewish state. It can be a militarized state with an army. This state can be the target of anti-Semitism. And this is a very, very crucial idea because it's not at all obvious. Because as I said, the whole problem was Jews were minority persecuted by states. Saying that now the Jewish state, that very often, and some say structurally, is persecuting minorities, can become the target of anti-Semitism is the basic shift of this definition that I find highly problematic.
Okay. But I also think it's important to carve out what about criticism of Israel could be anti-Semitic, while at the same time we carve out a space for legitimate and very important criticism of Israel. But you're saying that this document or this definition fails to make that distinction. Would you say it fails to make the right distinction so that we can distinguish legitimate criticism from anti-Semitic criticism? Or are you saying that, or
I might have saying it's a categorical
it's more
mistake.
Categorical mistake in the definition of the definition of Jews.
It started already in the 70s. People were talking about new anti-Semitism about Israel. I think it's a categorical mistake. It is not anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is, again, a historical phenomena of the persecution by majoritarian European nation state against a Jewish, defenseless Jewish minority, mostly based on racism, namely about ideas that have nothing to do with what these people were doing. Attributing to them things that have nothing to do with them. This is not the case with the State of Israel. The State of Israel is a Jewish political project that, in the name of being Jewish, does things that many people think are problematic. This is, in its essence, not a problem of anti-Semitic racism. It's a problem of critique of Jews against what they're doing as Jews, which is sometimes legitimate, sometimes problematic, but it's not anti-Semitism.
Yeah, it's problematic in other ways, we would say.
Yes, I mean, okay, let's, critique of Woody Allen can be anti-Semitic. The whole discussion around Epstein had a lot of anti-Semitic elements in it. So what, we're gonna now say, you're not allowed to discuss, sexual crimes because it might be anti-Semitic. There is a problem always of anti-Semitism.
Yeah, that's unhelpful.
But that's not the core of the issue. It's a categorical mistake, simply.
Yeah.
But there does seem to be, and I think, Halvar, I know you're not steeped in this discourse, but I think
I'm not.
For people on the outside, I think there is a lot of worry about where the line is between critique of Israel and anti-Semitism, or critique of Jewish people and anti-Semitism. And I mean, I guess there's no perfect formula for figuring out what that is, where that line is, but there is a line, I guess, right? I mean, there must be some way to make a distinction there. I mean, because you can be anti-Semitic and also criticize the state of Israel. I mean, you can.
You can, and I think this is what I'm saying. Everything can be anti-Semitic. However, there are cases in which you have a much, much better explanation than anti-Semitism. In the case of Epstein, there are much better explanation why people criticize him than being anti-Semitic. And the same goes to Israel. There are much, much better explanation why people criticize Israel than being anti-Semitic. So making it an exemplary case and making a whole bunch of laws just about this and making this the issue, I think is first a categorical mistake, but then politically basically manipulative.
What do you think about this, the argument that criticism of Israel fits into that narrative structure that we started with, like in the sense of Israel, and I accept that Jews have maybe done this to themselves in a sense, but that Israel is supposed to is kind of singled out, this double standard argument that lots of
Mm.
states do the kinds of things that Israel does, but there isn't so much
Mm.
focus on them. Like, what is your hot take on that question?
Well, I find, it brings us back to really, as you say, the first question, and to see in what ways there are all these narratives that you can find in, what used to be called anti-Semitism, and today I don't know exactly even what it is, which is singling out the Jews, putting them as the cause and so forth. But these narratives go to Judaism historically, into contemporary Judaism, and into any other powerful discourses that refer to Jews that we don't immediately say anti-Semitic, like Christianity, where it's very central for Christian theology and apocalypse, what Jews are doing and what is happening with Jews. And therefore it's so complicated to say, this is anti-Semitic, where you see, this is actually what is happening. And the talk about anti-Semitism reproduces it again, because we single out anti-Semitism. People who push back say anti-Semitism is just like any other racism. No, people tell you no. It's exemplary, it's exceptional. There is an exception of anti-Semitism. And it's the same people who tell anti-Semitic with those who make exception of Israel. You see how these things mirror themselves, and the problem is to say, I ignore this mirroring. I say only I am allowed to do the exceptions, but they are not allowed to do the exceptions. This is the problematic that I keep seeing.
But well, I'm thinking about the language that I hear people use about Israel these days, or in Norway, in the public discourse and in conversations, that are they are talking about Israel as an inherently evil nation that perpetrates genocide, and people, I experience that some people I talk to will not, they are not interested in talking about the 7th of October attacks and the trauma in Israel surrounding that, even though I probably think they would agree that it was a terrible atrocity. They are, at least this is just my subjective experience, that people are reluctant to go into that. But at the same time, they use language that is, it sounds to me dehumanizing. For example, when they use the terms like the Zionist entity, or and I think it's important in those conversations to remind people, just remember that we're talking about humans in flesh and blood on both sides in the conflict, and that it was a huge trauma and pain. Even though it's extremely asymmetrical, of course, the number of casualties is extremely asymmetrical, we still must be able to recognize the pain and trauma, the disaster of that event. So I'm worrying that there's something anti-Semitic in these trends where people talk about Israel in that way. But I also definitely think that there must be a space for criticism of Israel without being labeled an anti-Semite. So that's why this is my experience of this conversation, which makes it very hard to talk about. But you, Elad, would not say that it is. You would say it's a category mistake to claim that this discourse or anti-Israel discourse is anti-Semitic. It's the wrong it's the wrong approach to understand that discourse? Or
look, we are talking about a situation of extreme violent conflicts.
Yeah.
So let's presuppose that everybody in this conflict and in talking about the conflicts, anybody that still haven't come with a good idea of to solve it, does something wrong. Okay, in the way they treat the others. Let's start with this. It's hard to find someone who treats the other party, and I'm not talking about Israel, Palestinians, Arabs. I'm also talking about Europeans. Okay, the way that they treat the others at the moment is full of problems. It's hard to find someone who gets it right. Very difficult. Okay, so there are many problems in how we treat, because the situation is a conflict, is violent conflict. Now, this is why I'm saying, calling it anti-Semitic, even, there are also anti-Semitic. There is also anti-Semites. Okay? There are also anti-Semitic, but I don't think this is the main issue here. I think there are many more central problems. When you say people, say things that they don't fully understand about Israel and Palestine, okay, demonstrate without knowing exactly. Maybe, there are a lot of problems with that. I don't think it's anti-Semitic. I think it's a lot of problems of how dealing with armed, ongoing, extreme conflicts. How do we deal with that? Also with Ukraine and Russia, there are things that people do say that are wrong. A lot of things that are wrong. Okay, people that treat either Russians or Ukrainians as, something simple and easy and stupid that is easy to hate and fight against. I think it's a problem. I think it's a problem. Maybe there are even, sometimes anti-Russian sentiments that come close to anti-Russian racism or something like that. I'm sure there is this. There's also that in this, and today in Russia against Ukrainians, in Ukraine against everybody else. I'm sure there is all. It's part of a conflict, and it's the same thing in Israel-Palestine. Now, concretely, I think in the situation of Israel-Palestine, as someone who is coming from Israel, who is thinking about it, I think there is a need. There is a structure of problems in the political foundation and structure of Israel that I think need to be fundamentally rethought and changed. Okay, there are a lot of names for that, but I think there is a basic problem that needs to be rethought, and I think today the discourse on anti-Semitism prevents us from doing so, because it prevents us from calling into question basic elements in what makes the state of Israel what it is today. And one of these things is, for example, talking about Zionism, talking about colonialism, talking about apartheid, and so forth and so forth. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's not the right words, and maybe you should use other words, and maybe it's... But I don't think it's something that we should prohibit. I think it's a debate that should be not only allowed, but encouraged.
And that's a very interesting point you're making. And I read in your article from 2024, which is called Back to Exile, where you describe, you start by describing this conversation and this a lot of political diversity and a lot of criticism of this right-wing shift in Israel. But then you're saying that when the October 7th attack happened, that conversation was halted or obstructed, or it stopped in many ways. I'm just interesting from a Israeli perspective, how is the conversation in Israel? Is there a space for this sort of conversation now, or is the events of October 7th too close and the war and the war fever to making it very difficult to have such a conversation?
It's a very good question. It's a very good question, because I think it touches. It's true that Israel, itself, there is an inner crisis in Israel. It's not only Israel versus, Palestinians, Arabs, the world. There is an inner. What exactly is the nature of this crisis is not always clear. Where exactly the line passes, who are the actors? It's not exactly clear. You're right, there was before October 7th, there was a very clear clash between what seems to be two big camps, one led by the government, especially the right-wing sides, trying to kind of change the constitutional structure of the state of Israel, very focusing on the core. It's something similar we saw in other countries in the last years. And against that, a group, of growing group of Israelis that says, we are not ready to lose the democratic nature allegedly of the state of Israel, and we're going to fight for it. So it was kind of those allegedly against democracy, those for democracy. So, and it seemed that there would be a whole rift, even at the moment, kind of elite groups like high, commanders in the military, even pilots that, are the most elite group, so to speak, of Israelis, where military service is very important for social status. Anyway, they said, we're going to stop fighting here. We're going to stop fighting. So it came really for a huge break in the society. One thing, however, they refused to talk about, the protesters, namely the Palestinians. From the very beginning, in order for the protests to work, they had to say, they decided strategically, we're not going to make an issue of the Palestinians. So it's all about what's happening inside of Israel and about this, what's called constitutional reform, which remained quite abstract. Its purpose of this reform remained quite abstract. People were talking, democracy in general way, but it was not clear what is at stake. And the one thing that was clearly at stake is Palestinians, and say, we're not going to talk about. So at the very beginning, there was something problematic about this protest, about what seemed to be a huge crisis. And indeed, the moment that October happened and Israel started a war, the conflict ended. All those who said, we will not fight for this government, we will not risk our life for this government is dangerous, it's going to destroy Israel, they just stopped. They immediately joined the government, immediately went to war, and this has not stopped since. So the war, as wars do, created a absolute unification of Israelis behind the government, even though, little by little people started asking questions, complaining about Netanyahu, but the level of protest that we saw before October, we never saw after.
And I was thinking that the Hamas terrorists who attacked Israel, they attacked specifically kibbutzes where left-wing people lived, people who would have been more open to those stories that you are describing, and the stories about the plight of the Palestinians and this unacceptable situation that they have the situation they are in, and that the fact that they were specifically targeted, or at least I have read this, they were specifically targeted, made it even harder to be in that position after the atrocity.
Do you know why they were directly immediately targeted?
I don't know why. No,
I will tell you.
Oh, because of the vicinity,
yes, because they sit
border.
The closest. Yeah. They sit the closest to Gaza.
Yeah.
Okay, so why would left-wing activists will choose to sit next to Gaza? I will tell you why. Because the kibbutzim historically were used for the colonization of Palestine, and I'm saying it in a neutral way, in the sense of creating a settlement of Jews around Palestine. So the kibbutzim originally were sitting on the borders, were guarding the borders. Now, there was a whole issue of course, socialist, communist, there is a leftist element in it. But the kibbutz was a clear part of the political border of Israel, always sitting on the border. So in this sense, the kibbutzim were not leftist. Okay, the kibbutzim did not fulfill another role in the conflict with the Palestinians and the Arabs than Israel. This is why they were sitting on the border. Now, what can I tell you? Of course, there are in the kibbutzim people who are today, and there were individuals that were, doing an amazing work in a Jewish Arab, Jewish Palestinian activism and so forth. And they were a part of the victims. Of course, this is a war. Of course, you have also the good people from both sides that are part of the war. This is the problem with this kind of conflict. Evidently, this is what is happening. But it's not like the Hamas, were looking to specifically hit leftist Israelis. That's of course not.
Or
They
what
just
people
went
say
to the closest settlements.
But the effect, nevertheless, the effect was that, well, okay, you're problematizing that, but the effect many have pointed out was that those who would have been the most favorable to the Palestinians were killed. But maybe that's not correct. I cannot be very adamant about this. I have never been to Israel. I have never been to a kibbutz, so I'm no expert here. So yeah,
there is something to it. There is something to it, but that's not not the point.
But
those who are favorable in Israel for negotiations with Palestinians and changing the situation are doing so because they know that they are the victims of the situation. They are not doing it by sheer altruism. They know that they are the victims. This is why they do it. They know that there is terror, there is war. Everybody is going to hit because this is the nature of this violence. This is why they're doing it.
And in your article, you say in the Back to Exile, your article, you describe the feeling in Israel after October 7th in a very strong way. You say that the feeling of weakness that was unleashed, the feeling of weakness unleashed a lust for power in the killing machines and in the rage unleashed on Gaza. Israel is revealed as a warlord. And in this revelation, it becomes clear again that the Jewish state is purchased with human sacrifice. I find that a very thought-provoking statement about both the experience of the weakness when the borders are gone and one is exposed to an attack and to an atrocity, and then this rage that was unleashed on Gaza. Would you elaborate on that?
Yes, I think one of the ways in which extreme political power manifests itself, and it's one of its targets, is to create spaces where people don't see the power. Okay, this is democratic spaces. Okay, you have a state, and ideally, you don't feel that it's a violent project. You don't see the police so much. You definitely don't see the military so much. Ideally, you create a climate where everything is peaceful and nice, a nice European state, city. What is happening is that this is exactly the privilege of taking the power of the state and putting it away from its citizens, so they don't need to see it. The people who see it are the people, of course, who are being subjected directly to the power of the state, usually people outside of the state, usually people that are prohibited from entering the border. Okay? On the other side of the wall, you don't see them. Okay? Europe puts refugee camps outside of Europe. So we don't need to see, what it means to have a state power that can decide who is in, is out. In Israel, it has been done precisely through the separation walls in Gaza, in the West Bank. Only the Palestinians see what it means to have a Jewish state, the power, the violence. They see that. Optimally, the official policy of the state of Israel was not to solve the conflict, was to manage it. And managing it meant to have Israelis the privilege of not knowing about the conflict. Okay, there is a wall. There are different high-tech measures that make it such that in Israeli, you don't need to know that there are Palestinians and that there's still a problem with the Palestinians, that they are still suffering under non-human rights, expanding dispossession and so forth. You don't need to know about it. So it's fine. You don't need to solve it. You don't feel it. Only the Palestinian feel it. Only the Palestinian know. Now, what happened in October 7th? Among other things, one of the symbolic moments was to break the wall. Okay, the Palestinians come outside, they break the wall, and they tell you, now the violence is here at your home. At your home, 2 kilometers, you could have a party. You could celebrate. You could have, live as if nothing happens. 2 kilometers from you, people are living in a completely different universe, in a universe that of no political rights, of oppression, of no future. All this violence, all this depression, all this monstrosity entered the state of Israel, and people saw the violence. Now, of course, immediately for them, it was no state. And it's true. There is no state. In one sense, yes, you are now exposed to the violence. What they, of course, forgot, this violence is coming from Gaza, not because it started from Gaza, not because the Palestinian or Arabic or anti-Semitic or Islamic violence. It's the violence of the conflict itself, which was simply, by their own government, was made invisible for them in order to perpetuate it, because they had the privilege. They had the privilege. And what they saw was the violence of the conflict that has been ongoing for 8 decades. This is what was exposed. And this goes back to your question before. This is something that perhaps is changing deeply now, the crisis, that the violence is there and you can no longer ignore it. What will happen politically, I'm not sure, but I think this is a very important change.
But specifically what happened was not only that the violence was unleashed in Israel, but we're talking about specifically about extreme violence, sadistic events, sexual violence. There is a report, there have been various reports that describe sadistic behavior that seems to be beyond what one could expect from as part of sort of fighting back against occupation or fighting back against repression. There were some that just find it very hard to process.
I find it hard to process that there is like decades, literally decades of 4 generations of Palestinians that daily go through different kind of horrors, and nobody's shocked by anything. Nobody asks anyone to deny anything. Nobody thinks about it. Nobody writes a report about it. It's not true. Some people do. It's not true. There are reports about what happened in Gaza, what happened in the Nakba, what happened in Samar and Shatila, what happened in thousands events, which are terrible. There are also Palestinian events against Israel that are terrible. There is an ongoing violence, which I call monstrosity. This monstrosity find now, one of its terrible events is the October 7th event, but it is one in a sea of monstrosities, and the monstrosity that followed it made 10,000 times, literally 1,000 times horrors. So what do you think? If there is an F-16 that put a bomb and 300 people are dying, including kids, why is it less barbaric and terrible from killing people with knives? Do you think if you give the Hamas F-16 and you tell them you don't need to see anybody, you don't need to touch anybody, you just press a button and thousands of Israelis will die? They will not prefer it. I find it so hard that people make it's in an all terrible violent situation that people single out and turn into one party as the barbarian terrible party on which we have to write reports, and the other party is completely justified in everything that it does because there is this report. I find it simply manipulative. And now I'm not accusing you in manipulation. You are voicing things that people hear about, and it's fine. We need to deal with it all the time. I'm just saying that I think the structure of this discourse is very problematic.
But the discourse that I respond to it's making some of the same points as you're making. The discourse that I respond to me seems anti-Israeli in the sense that it's that pain and trauma of Israelis is not recognized as part of the story. So that's what I'm reacting to. But I also agree completely that if one responds to a discourse where the Palestinians are just removed from the equation as if their suffering doesn't exist, then that would be deeply problematical. Maybe it has to do with like which voices we're listening to, like which discourses we are immersed in. Because I completely agree. There are these different information bubbles, I call it, where we inhabit, and we hear these different stories. So I have deliberately actually looked for Jewish voices and Israeli voices to listen to them and to listen to experiences that Israelis have about how does it feel to be targeted by a group like Hamas, or to have missiles shot at Israel, simply to sort of correct for what I see as a bias, an anti-Israeli bias. But at the same time, I agree completely.
Norwegian, part of the Norwegian media ecosystem.
Yeah. I just found it I would like to give one example of after like 2 or 3 days after the October 7th attack. There was a panel discussion on the Norwegian state television channel, a debate, and the guy, Fredrik Solvang is his name, he presented this as sort of, there were 2 sides, that there were 2 Jewish representatives, and one of them I think was in Israel and the other was in Oslo. And he started by saying that what happened on October was a terrible atrocity. It was simply, it was wrong. It was a murder of innocent civilians, and this is completely unjustified. And then he just said, "This is what you say." And then he looked at the Jewish person in the panel debate. "This is your position in the debate." And she confirmed, her name Sarah Abraham. She confirmed, "Yes, that's what I think. It was completely wrong, completely evil, and an atrocity, like with ISIS and Boko Haram or stuff like that." And then he turned to, on the other side, we have those who think that this was resistance, this was fighting back, and this has to do with, it was more like what you say, Elad, that this was the result of generations of Palestinian suffering and pain. I just found it problematical to frame this debate in that way, especially in that moment, just a few days after the atrocity had happened, because it made it seem as if condemning October 7th was specifically like a Israeli perspective or Jewish perspective. While I would say it was like basic human dignity, basic human morality, entails that what they did on that day was wrong, like we shouldn't put it for debate. But in another context, it would have been very important to have Palestinian voices and to learn stories of the Palestinian, the unacceptable situation for generations. I just found it very, so after that, and after discussing with some people who really almost said that, well, they had it coming, or this is what you can expect when you treat them like that, or just at that point, I started thinking I need to correct for this by deliberately trying to look at this from a more Israeli perspective. But I never, of course, at the same time, I agreed that it seems completely unacceptable that the Palestinians should be refugees for many generations and not have a state, not have liberties, not have rights, not being able to move freely. That was just my experience of this debate that led me to be more interested in hearing other voices that are not so often represented in Norway, in the discourse in Norway. But
no, I think it's important to bring voices.
Yeah.
I have to say that politically, it seems to me that if there is any bias, it's a pro-Israeli bias. I don't see anybody doing so much for the Palestinians, or that any country in the world has done anything significant to stop the genocide for 2.5 years, nor doing anything now to stop the ongoing ethical cleansing in the West Bank, or anything to help the 2 million Palestinians who still sit in Gaza with no infrastructure, no food, no roof above their head. Who is doing anything about it? Who is talking about it? It's nobody. Nobody has doing anything for many years before. Nobody has made panels on television, after any time that Israel has been doing to Palestinians in Gaza or elsewhere, and asking people to be shocked about anything. Nobody did it. Nobody said it. And I see from a Palestinian perspective, they say, for generations, nobody talk about it. Nobody asked, how do we feel? Nobody say, let's condemn Israel, or let's at least talk about it, or let's just acknowledge it. Nobody say anything. And then October 7th, suddenly history stops. This becomes, the event around which everything circles before and after, as if now happens up. And what happened now? What happened now is that for the first time, the violence was in Israel itself. The same violence that Palestinians are exposed to for generations. And so for their perspective, they said, we are simply shocked that suddenly we need to start saying, as if we are the violent people, and we need to distance ourselves and condemn. And what happens to all the violence that is directed against us? Who is asking anyone to condemn, to distance themselves, who is asking anybody to take this into account? I think this is the problem that I'm talking about. And I think for you, if you do want to bring more voices, I would recommend highly to do a podcast with Palestinians.
Well, that sounds like a good idea. Yeah, I'm thinking that there was a point during these 2 years where it was clear that they had moved beyond what one could expect in the context of self-defense. And there were these images from Gaza that were simply like apocalyptic, just unbelievable images of destruction. So definitely, even though I tried to specifically also listen to Jewish voices and Israeli voices, it was clear that this level of destruction is beyond normal, or what is normal warfare, at least beyond self-defense. And it makes me think about Judith Butler, who wrote this precarious life book in the wake of 9/11, and also discussed the Israel-Palestine conflict. And she says that the victim is a quickly transposable term. It can shift from minute to minute, from the Jew atrociously killed by suicide bombers on a bus to the Palestinian child atrociously killed by Israeli gunfire. But also the point is that the public sphere needs to be one in which both kinds of violence are challenged insistently. That both there is pain, trauma, real pain, real trauma on both sides, and even if it's asymmetrical, it still matters, the pain on the side which is the least affected. I think in the name of, I think that was a good point. Would you comment on that, on Judith Butler's view here, and Gabe also, if you want to jump in?
Elad,
well,
yeah, go for it.
Well, I basically agree with Judith Butler, and her positions. I find many of the things that she said in the context of Israel and Palestine helpful. Also parting ways, where she directly, addresses Israel, Palestine, and her intervention in the last 2.5 years. I found interesting and thoughtful. I agree that sometimes people coming a lot from Butler's thought, talking about not only about the value of human life, but in terms of who is grievable, who are we mourning, and so forth. And I think it's highly important also in this context to see it's as an indication to she in the quote that you just read. There is this idea of symmetry, asymmetry. Yes, there is a fundamental asymmetry, which indeed you can see in who is being grieved, who has a name, who has a picture, who do we know about, who do we never hear about, what people are important and what people are unimportant, and for whom. And it's crucial to follow this. I think it's an indication. Well, it's indication. It's human life. This is what it's all about. But it's indication that's beyond. Of course, we all care about. We don't want people to die. We should all mourn for everybody and try to save every human life. But there is an indication in the fact that we don't. In some way, we, not an individual, as a whole system, as a whole society, that we don't care for all human life the same way. It's an indication of the way in which not all human life are protected in the same way. It's not that we're not sad that people are dying. People are more dying in some societies than others. People are more dying or early dying or quickly dying or terribly dying in more societies than others. It's not just, the symmetry of who you care about, of who we save, who we even, what life do we nurture and cultivate and what not. And this is what we were talking about. We were talking about, the situation of the Palestinians. It's not just, they are limited in territory. They would like to live in Haifa, but they cannot. They can only live in Ramallah, or they're closing Gaza. They have less universities and maybe less thing in the supermarket. No, we're talking about an entire human life that is being less cultivated, less given possibility of prosper, given simply less value. And this is like a basic idea that should be unacceptable, but simply it's been accepted for generations and generations and decades, that there are millions of people who live in situations that you will not want to live in, but you don't care about. Totally. I'm not talking about you personally. I'm talking, of course, most of all, people who live in the other side of the border and have, rave festivals on the other side. While the other side, there are people whose life simply worth much less. They don't get to eat. They don't get to dream. They don't get to have future. For generations, I'm not talking now about the genocide, I'm talking about really generations of refugees camps on refugees camps, they don't get the same life as you. And why? Why? And then when we die, we say, yes, we don't care about them when they die because we didn't care about them when they were alive. This is the problem. This is the issue that need to be addressed.
Totally, it needs to be addressed and to be discussed. This issue, I've been thinking about the West, what is called the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, that were not. It was not. I'm definitely no expert here, but I have read that these areas after the construction, after Israel was established, these areas were occupied by Jordan and Gaza was controlled by Egypt until 1967. And I have been talking to people about this, and I wonder what you think about this idea that the Jordanians and the Egyptians didn't want a Palestinian state. They didn't help establish a Palestinian state when these territories were under their control. And then Israel took control of these areas, and now we are in a situation where they are not in favor of a two-state solution, and they are, as you are saying, they are colonizing these areas, and or is that what you're saying? They're colonizing at least the West Bank, and they are making it impossible to build a state. My point is that in the stories that I hear from many people, Israel is considered illegitimate as a state in the first place, and the main reason that the Palestinians do not have a state, even in those areas that Israel didn't hold or control after it was established. But it seems that also the Arab states surrounding Israel and Palestine might not have wanted a Palestinian competitor state that they had to deal with. So it seems that, and it also seems that or please correct if this is wrong, but that the Egyptians also have helped Israel with the blockade of Gaza and not allowed Palestinians to escape or to get to buy things or get medicines or things they need. So it's sort of Israel together with other Arab states have been part of a larger it's a larger story here where not only Israel is the sort of the bad guy who is the reason for everything wrong, but there are other, it's more complicated is my point there.
No, it's a good point. Look, of course, it's not just an Israeli-Palestinian question, of course, and it's not also a Jewish-Arab question. Of course, it was a British Empire. It was an Ottoman Empire. There were, agreements between France and Britain. There was later, of course, until today, involvement of the U.S., of Germany, of Europe. Of course, it's a larger problem. It's not about that. And of course, in the region itself, it was not just the Zionist or the State of Israel. Of course, there was a huge issues with Jordan, which basically saw itself as the Palestinian state in many ways, because the majority in Jordan are Palestinians. So Abdallah ordered in 48 thought they're going to be the Palestinian state. You don't need another one. Of course, it was not the case. There was, of course, it's a.
So if there was no Zionism and there was no Israel, maybe there still wouldn't have been a Palestine in the sense of the pro-Palestinian, what they imagine should have been.
Maybe the issue
or
is
obviously, how can we know that? But I'm just a thought.
The point is, it's not about looking for who to blame. That's not the issue. The issue is to look what is the problematic structure and what do we need to change. Okay. So of course you could say you need to change the whole world. You do. But more specifically to Israel Palestine, when you talk about the legitimacy, not legitimacy Israel, it's not a moral question. That's not about the idea of Israel will go to hell or to heaven. That's not the idea. The issue is about what do we need to fix in order to change the situation. How deep do we need to go? Okay. What do you mean the legitimacy of a state? Legitimacy in the sense of what is the nature of this project that you're doing? What is happening? What is creating the issue? And I think we need to, some people, everybody agrees that we need to change something, right? Nobody thinks this can go on. Some people think the problem is the Palestinians, they should go away, or disappear, or someone who taking, maybe Norway should take them. Okay, I don't think that this is the right way to go. I think the Palestinians should be where they are and should live exactly in the same life value and expectations and prosperity as Israelis. So I think what needs to be changed is the political structure on the ground now, which is now divided between a democratic state and large areas and people held under military occupation. I think this cannot stand. This is literally apartheid. On one territory, different populations held under different political conditions. These need to be changed. And in order to change this, yes, you have to redefine the political structure at presence in the area, which is the state of Israel.
So you're describing like an inclusive one-state solution, like a one-state solution in the sense that both Palestinians and Israelis would have equal rights within the same state. Is that?
I don't know how it should look. Okay. On that area, everybody who lives on that area has to have, like everybody lives in Europe, they have to have the same, I don't even, perfect equality before communism. Okay, just have the liberal equality of having the same, political status. You're a citizen, you have the same possibilities, more or less, to act in your, politically in your capacity. This has to happen. How one state, two state, confederation, I'm not sure. We're not even sure what it means today on the ground, because it has become so impossible to even imagine territorial separation because of the politics of the current government, which basically is in de facto maybe de jure annexation of the West Bank and a annihilation of Gaza, that I don't even know what we're talking about. Territorially, we need to rethink even physically, what is the land, where are the people? But it has to go in this direction, yes.
It has to go in a direction not so. Ethnic cleansing or genocide would be unacceptable. So it seems to me that only an inclusive one-state solution or a two-state solution seem morally acceptable. But and again, I haven't been in Israel, so I cannot speak very strongly on this. But
break in because it seems like
yeah,
the issue is like, I mean, why people would be like, I guess, worried about that is like because they think it's the project of the Jewish state. So basically, you're saying what we need to do as Jews and not in our name is have a Jewish state. We need to be okay with the idea that it might not be a Jewish state in the end.
yeah,
Basically, or am I
okay.
reading you right, Elad? Or
Well,
that's a
yeah,
possibility.
yeah,
That,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Well, not in the sense that it understands itself currently what is being Jewish state,
Right, right. Okay,
or of what is being Jewish. So in a
right,
sense, if it continue like this without changing, it will not be a Jewish state in
right,
this sense. If you
right.
know,
So it could still be a Jewish state, but
But with equal
we
rights
might need
for
to change what it means. What
yeah,
we don't know exactly what that would mean.
yeah. Well, you know, what is a Jewish state? It's you
Right.
know, it's a big issue. If we're
Yeah.
talking about a place where Jews can live and prosper,
Yeah.
you know, like the U.S.,
Yeah. Is the U.S. a Jewish state? Yeah.
maybe, you know,
But-
maybe it's the better Jewish state,
yeah.
Judenstaat. This is the state where Jews can develop themselves and Judaism better than they can do in Israel.
Yeah. For now.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
for now.
Yeah. Mm.
also it's such a complicated
Mm.
issue here. So let's start concluding this conversation. When I was preparing for this, I was thinking about, because of this apartheid state, Israel is often called an apartheid state, and you also did now, Elad, mention it, that you consider it as a form of apartheid. Well, I was thinking about South Africa. I have been there. I've been 3 times in South Africa, and I have read about its history, and I remember that the Bishop Desmond Tutu was appointed by Nelson Mandela to lead the Truth and Reconciliation Committee that was part of the work that they did in South Africa to move the country forward after the apartheid era. And there are various statements he made that I find quite powerful, where he talked about reconciliation. He talked about what conditions need to be in place for us to be able to move forward after having lived in this apartheid regime where white people and people of color have been treated as they have been, and not being able to go to the same restaurant or to swim at the same beach or not talk to each other even. And he said in many places, he said that we need to, that forgiveness is based on a confession, and confession is based on truth. And he said that the most important thing that needs to happen is that what the suffering and trauma and pain that people have experienced needs to be recognized. And he also mentioned that this also includes the white minority that was very after the apartheid regime. They had lived with these huge privileges that were built on the suffering of Black South Africans for years. But Tutu also said that we need to recognize their suffering also. Like, we need to recognize there were cases where the people connected with the African National Congress had abused or killed or committed wrongful acts against white families. And he said that needs to be recognized as well. And there was a very controversial strategy they made, which was to give amnesty to some of the white perpetrators of atrocities in return for giving a statement where they admitted that what they had done, and that they gave the families of those who had been affected the truth about what happened, and that they admit guilt. So I just want to end with what do you think about this process in South Africa, and this idea of Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu about recognizing the pain, even the pain of the bad guys, to put it bluntly, like the pain of everyone needs to be recognized if there's any chance to move forward. Yeah.
Look, I think yes, but I think both in South Africa and in other cases where the bad guy needed to be and was acknowledging their suffering, also in Germany, there was an acknowledgement that the Germans suffered, and there was, you need to, yes, of course, you need to acknowledge it. But both in South Africa and in Germany, the acknowledgement of the suffering of the bad guys, of the oppressors, took place after the oppression ended.
Yeah.
It needs to end. You don't end the oppression by recognizing the suffering of the oppressor. After the oppression ends, you say, we want to create a new society, then we need to create ways in which these millions of people can continue to live with us and with themselves. Okay, so in America, or the Allies after the World War, they said, you cannot make all the Germans Nazis. You have to say, no, there were Nazis who took over Germany, and now there is a new Germany, and the Germans are not Nazis. And in South Africa, you have to say, not all the whites are bad. You need to continue to live here. You have to say, okay, there is a way of kind of restructuring coexistence after, in both cases, the oppression and the extermination ends. In Israel, we are far from there. We are far from there. The oppression continues every day. They have a new law in Israel for death penalty only for Arabs. They have a new law for a special martial court for the Palestinians taken prisoners in the wars after October 7. This is now we are very far away from ending the catastrophe, whatever its name is. Genocide, occupation, whatever its name is in Israel. We don't even still have a name for that. It's ongoing. It hasn't ended yet. So we are not yet in the discussion that you want to talk about. Yes, one day.
No,
yes.
it's frightening what you're describing. Yeah.
This is what I think about. We need to look what happened, how they stopped the apartheid, how they stopped the Nazis, without making all the easiest comparison and so forth. Therefore, every situation has its own, but nonetheless, we need to see how it stopped, not how it was reconstructed after. Another question, but the first one, how to stop it?
Well, you're raising important points here, and I was thinking that there are Israeli citizens, Arab citizens so there's a distinction here between Arab Israelis that have Israeli citizenship and Palestinians who don't have Israeli citizenship, right? So you're saying this court-martial law applies to Palestinians, or does it apply to Arab Israelis also? The death penalty that you mentioned.
So you raised the question of apartheid. Of course, the basic issue with the Israeli apartheid is that it fragmented what is Palestinian or what is Arab Palestinian into three different groups. Those who got passports and live in Israel, those who don't and live nonetheless in the territories occupied by Israel, and those who live somewhere else, diaspora Palestinians. Okay, Israel made this distinction. Now within the areas controlled by Israel, there is a distinction with Palestinians that are citizen Palestinians in the West Bank. So there is already now this apartheid. The specific law that was enacted, the capital punishment, yes, it only applies to the territories, to the West Bank, basically, and it says every act of terror, but not such that is being committed by Israeli citizens. Now, basically, what it means is that Jews who are currently committing everyday acts of terror are not considered to be a terror at all, and definitely are not considered to be liable for death penalty. They're not even, they're not even arrested. What were you talking about? On the other side, only the Arabs that are doing acts that are understood to be terror, which today could be just the very fact of resisting being taken your land from you is considered to be could be act of terror. They are the only ones who will be subjected to death penalty.
Yeah, that's frightening. Gabe, did you want to jump in?
No, just clarifying that.
Yeah.
You mean that especially what the Israeli settlers in the West Bank, they won't be subject to that law.
To that law, yeah.
They're not even, I'm telling you, they're not even detained by the police, arrested. They're not even detained. The police the police of Ben Gvir, of the most radical politician in Israel today, he is the head of the police. Okay, so the police not only not detains them, the police helps them. What are we talking about?
Yeah, it's really a frightening situation, and I think we who are like me, who are bystanders, we are observing what is happening. We're trying to understand, and we are listening to all these stories and to the conversation. We need to keep talking about this, and especially keep talking about it in a civilized way, like trying to learn from each other and just trying to get some perspective. Most Norwegians have never been to Israel or Palestine, and to have some perspective that we're not this is very complex and messy and difficult. And so I just want to end by asking to wrap up. I was thinking about to return to the topic of anti-Semitism, and like as a white person, I wouldn't. How could I lecture a black person on racism? Like I couldn't. But what is important for non-Jews to understand about anti-Semitism today? Are there some final points both of you would like to make about anti-Semitism and people who are not Jewish and who don't have the experience of being targeted for being Jewish in different ways?
Okay. That's a big question to
kind
of end on, but I mean, this is sort of related, maybe that we started with this idea of these narratives, and that anti-Semitism has this kind of structure, and that in the Bible there's a kind of the Bible kind of initiates that structure in a sense. But one thing that like I see is very different in that narrative in the Bible, or this idea of chosenness is like it's the complete inversion of that story. Like in that story, the Jews are chosen, and that's a good thing. They're chosen, and what they're doing is supposedly good for the rest of the world. In the anti-Semitic discourse, it's flipped, or the script is flipped. So, I mean, so maybe that's a positive thing to think about, that if Jews think of themselves that way as doing something good for the world, there is that ideal in it. If it's the same structure, we're basically saying. So that maybe that's a better way to look at this structure, that to try to encourage kind of the positive side of that narrative, since it doesn't seem like we can't really escape it. That's one of the things I got out of this, that we try to flip it around into anti, and you can just keep going down the thing, but you never really escape that structure. It seems like it's really hard. It's really hard to say to a Norwegian, like, why do you give a crap about what's going on in some faraway place that you've never been to? And it's because this is a Christian culture. That's why they care, basically. They have a reason to care. That all their narratives are also shaped by these narratives. So it's one big giant narrative. So you can't really say. I do want to say, like, just let Israelis and maybe Jews and Palestinians and people in the Middle East try to figure this out and keep your nose out of it, but maybe that's really not possible. So yeah, so I guess what I'm saying is yeah, we have to try to encourage more of the positive influence impulses in that narrative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. And Elad, your some final thoughts about anything
Yes.
people who are not Jewish should know about anti-Semitism?
Yeah, they should know that the discourse about anti-Semitism and anti-antisemitism in Europe today is being mostly led by non-Jews, by European parties that very often are cynically using this discourse to for goals that are very far away from the Middle East, that are very close to home. And these are right-wing parties who use the discourse of anti-Semitism and anti-antisemitism basically as a tool to fight immigration. Immigration that very often comes from Arab, Muslim countries. And it is this discourse today that is operatively, if you look, what is doing, it is basically doing this. It is used by right or far right parties in order as a yet another weapon to fight immigration and to fight the ongoing diversification of European societies. Sadly, they use Jews to do it. So I think we should be in Europe very, very suspicious about this discourse that is to 95% manipulative and is far from protecting Jews, is in cynically way using the life of Jews in order to promote very similar ideologies to the one that were responsible for the persecution of Jews just less than 100 years ago. This would be my message to European listeners, also outside of Europe.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much to both of you for providing your perspectives on this highly complicated topic. So it has really, I think this has really been thought-provoking, and learned a lot from listening to both of you. And thank you so much.
Thanks for having
Thank you, Halvor, for inviting us and having the courage to have a debate on things that we all know are very, very sensitive to talk about. So thank you very much for doing it.
Thank you.